A farmer's son catches illegal hunters, but the next morning, FBI agents swarm the farm with an unexpected mission. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. A thin layer of fog drifted over the rolling fields as dawn broke on the quiet Prescott farm. The morning sun, still low on the horizon, cast elongated shadows of fence posts and tall grass. In the main house, an aging structure with chipped paint and a wraparound porch, Mark Prescott, a weathered yet strong-willed farmer in his early 50s, was already up. He stood in the kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee while his gaze lingered on the sprawling land visible through the window. Decades of tending these acres had etched lines of both fatigue and pride into his features, yet his brown eyes held a relentless spark of devotion to the soil beneath his boots. Outside, the clucking of hens and the distant moo of a cow signaled the farm's daily rhythm, a routine Mark had cherished since inheriting the place from his father. He remembered being no older than 8 when he first followed Grandpa James around these fields, learning to mend fences, feed livestock, and respect the power of the land. That sense of respect carried into Mark's fatherhood, shaping how he raised his only child, Ryan, now a 17-year-old with an adventurous spirit that matched his father's love for the farm. It was Ryan's final summer before college applications began to loom over him, and he spent most of his free time exploring the property's hidden corners. He knew every creek bend and tree cluster, every patch of wild berries. The farm was more than just a plot of land to him. It was a kingdom he had roamed and grown to cherish. But lately, something had felt off. In recent weeks, Ryan noticed fresh tracks through the eastern pasture, footprints leading deep into the woods, areas normally undisturbed. When Mark suggested it was probably just local hunters crossing property lines, Ryan's instincts told him otherwise. The footprints looked heavier, and the impressions indicated more than just the odd deer rifle. He mentioned it to his father, but Mark simply reminded him that they had no trespassing signs posted along the property's perimeter. In the pre-dawn hush that morning, Ryan quietly slipped out of the house, wearing his old hiking boots and a faded green jacket. His plan was to investigate the far side of the farm, hoping to catch sight of whoever had been tromping around. He left a short note for his father on the kitchen table, just a scribbled message saying he'd be back soon. Then he grabbed the battered binoculars Mark had once given him for bird watching, eased the screen door shut, and set off across the dew-laden grass. The trek to the eastern boundary took him along a gentle creek. Mist clung to the water's surface, swirled by occasional currents. Ryan's footsteps were soft against the damp ground. He had the kind of stealth only a farmer's kid developed, learned from years of early morning chores before the sun was up. With the binoculars swinging around his neck, he paused now and then to scan the distance, listening for anything other than nature's typical rustle. Eventually, he reached a section of broken fence hidden behind thick brush, a place few people ever ventured. It was here, just yesterday, that Ryan spotted deep boot prints leading into the woods. As he crouched to examine the ground, he caught a glimpse of something metallic, reflecting the early morning light. He moved closer to investigate, heart pounding with excitement and a gnawing sense of dread. Ryan parted the undergrowth and froze. Several yards away, 2 men dressed in camouflage were crouched beside a fallen buck, one of them holding a hunting rifle outfitted with a suppressor. It immediately struck Ryan as unusual. Legal hunters wouldn't typically use silencers. Nor would they operate so close to dawn, breaking both time and safety regulations. His throat went dry as he took in the scene. A buck, shot cleanly in the neck, lying motionless. The men were bickering in hushed but angry tones, presumably about how to drag the carcass out without drawing attention. The snap of a twig beneath Ryan's foot shattered the quiet. Instantly, the men whipped around, eyes narrowed and hands tightening on their weapons. Ryan's instinct was to bolt, but instead he forced himself to stay calm, stepping into the clearing with his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "What are you doing on this land?" he demanded, voice betraying more confidence than he felt. "You're trespassing on private property." For a moment neither man spoke, then the shorter one sneered. His face was gaunt, and a jagged scar ran along his jawline. "This your farm, kid?" Ryan swallowed, trying to keep his nerves under control. "My dad's. Which means you're on our land without permission." The taller hunter, broad-shouldered and silent until now, lifted his rifle in Ryan's direction, just enough to show who had the upper hand. "We're leaving. You didn't see anything, understand?" Ryan felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He was no fool. Standing in front of an armed stranger on a secluded part of the farm was a dangerous position to be in, but the anger at seeing their blatant disregard for his family's land, and for the law, pulsed through him. He raised his chin. "That buck you killed, that's illegal. There's no season for it right now." The shorter man muttered a curse, yanking the deer carcass's leg. "Mind your own business. We're giving you a chance to walk away, boy. Take it." Ryan didn't move. His defiance lit a spark of rage in the tall hunter's eyes. The man's finger twitched near the trigger, and Ryan felt a surge of real fear. Before the confrontation could explode, the shorter man hissed, "Let's go. Too risky to stay." He shot Ryan a final glare, then nodded to his partner. They struggled to hoist the deer, dragging it through the brush away from the boundary. Ryan exhaled shakily, relief flooding in. He debated whether to follow them, but common sense prevailed. If they turned around, he might not be so lucky a second time. Instead, he pulled out his phone, snapped a few quick pictures of the men's retreating backs, and saved them. The adrenaline left him feeling lightheaded. He stumbled back toward the creek, half running, half walking, determined to tell Mark everything. Meanwhile, Mark had begun to worry. The sun was climbing higher, and Ryan wasn't back. That note was too vague. Went to check the fence near the woods. Mark loaded up his ATV and headed out, weaving through the farm's back roads until he spotted his son jogging along the creek bank. Ryan waved him down, panting, eyes wide. In a tumble of words, he recounted the entire run-in with the two camouflaged men. "Illegal hunting. They had silencers. Threatened me," Ryan gasped. "I got pictures, Dad." Mark tried to keep his voice steady, though alarm pricked his thoughts. "We'll call the sheriff. This is more than trespassing," he said firmly, stepping off the ATV to examine the phone's photos. "Maybe the local game warden can identify them." Ryan nodded, still rattled. "They didn't act like normal hunters, Dad. I don't know, but I've never seen them before. They looked out of place." Mark recognized the intensity in his son's eyes. He reached out, steadying Ryan with a hand on his shoulder. "We'll handle this properly," he assured, though in the back of his mind the memory of similar incidents scratched at him. Over the past month, livestock had gone missing, gates had been tampered with, and random tire tracks had appeared near the fields. He'd brushed them off as random mischief or folks taking a shortcut. Now, with these men cornered near the fence, it felt like something bigger was happening. When they returned to the house, Mark phoned the local sheriff, a man named Bill Whitaker, who had been a family friend for years. Bill promised to head over soon, but as the hours ticked by, Bill never came. A second call went unanswered. The sheriff's deputy, when reached, claimed he hadn't heard from Bill all day. Frowning, Mark tried the game warden's office. There was no immediate reply. Frustration mounted, along with a creeping sense of unease. A restless night followed. Every stray noise seemed amplified. Ryan barely slept, replaying the confrontation in his mind, wondering if he'd see those men again. Mark sat in the living room, old rifle across his lap, trying to ignore the feeling that something more sinister was unfolding. At sunrise, they woke to an even stranger sight. Black SUVs crunched up the farm's gravel driveway, engines humming as they parked in front of the main house. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, each wearing a badge that glinted in the early light. Their faces were unreadable, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Ryan watched from a window, heart in his throat. This wasn't the local police. Mark opened the door, stepping onto the porch as the group approached. The lead agent, tall and precise in his movements, flashed an ID. "Special Agent DeWitt, FBI," he announced. "We need to speak with Mark Prescott." Mark's surprise was evident in the stiffening of his posture. "That's me," he said cautiously. "What's this about, Agent?" Instead of answering, Agent DeWitt motioned for one of his men to circle around back, as if expecting to secure the property. Another agent whispered into a radio, scanning the farmland. DeWitt stood calmly, gaze fixed on Mark. "You reported an incident here last night, illegal hunting and trespassing. We've received information that this property might be connected to a larger investigation." Ryan, peering from behind the doorway, felt his stomach tighten. The FBI? Over 2 hunters? His father's eyes flickered with confusion. "We called the sheriff, not the feds, and we never heard back from him." DeWitt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sheriff Whitaker is currently unreachable. We have reason to believe he may be compromised. This is a federal matter now." A cold wind seemed to blow through the porch despite the morning warmth. Mark swallowed, trying to keep his composure. "Compromised? Sheriff Whitaker? That's hard to believe." DeWitt lowered his voice, though it retained the sharpness of authority. "We're not here to argue about local law enforcement. We're here for the safety of you and your son, and to gather evidence. We have credible intel that those so-called hunters are part of an organized crime group trafficking contraband through rural routes. We suspect they're using farmland like yours to move goods under the radar." Ryan stepped out onto the porch, face pale. "They threatened me. Took down a deer on our property." DeWitt's expression revealed no surprise. "That's how we tracked them. Their group tries to blend in as local hunters, but we suspect a pipeline of weapons or other illegal items. We need your cooperation." He paused, scanning father and son. "We'll also need to search every inch of your farm. If you refuse, we can get a warrant, but time is crucial. These men are dangerous." Mark glanced at Ryan, who looked back with unease. The FBI presence was unnerving, but ignoring them wasn't an option. "All right," Mark said slowly, stepping aside. "You can look around." DeWitt signaled his team. One agent retrieved a set of documents from their SUV. Another started across the yard, toward the barns. Within minutes, a half-dozen more federal vehicles appeared, and men and women in jackets emblazoned with FBI spread out across the property with methodical efficiency. Ryan's heart pounded. He thought telling the sheriff about illegal hunters would lead to a citation, maybe confiscation of an illegally taken deer. But this? Agents with scanning gear, suits hustling back and forth, an entire command center forming on their front lawn. It was surreal. As Mark and Ryan stood on the porch, an agent approached, carrying a small device that looked like a specialized scanner. "We need to check inside your barns and sheds," he stated, voice crisp. "Any sealed-off rooms or locked storage areas?" Mark, stunned by how quickly the situation had escalated, nodded. "There's a locked tool shed behind the tractor barn. Keys are in the house." Ryan glanced out at the fields he knew so intimately. Now, strangers walked them in tight formations, searching for hidden compartments or evidence of criminal activity. It felt invasive, but there was an underlying sense of vindication. Someone was finally taking these trespassers seriously. Then he noticed the cold intensity with which the agents moved. They weren't just handling an isolated hunting violation. They were dealing with a major threat. Ryan realized the men who aimed that rifle at him might be part of something far larger than he had imagined. Agent DeWitt stepped up once more. "Mark, Ryan, do either of you have reason to believe those hunters stashed contraband on your land? Any unusual crates, containers, or deliveries? Think carefully." Mark's brow furrowed. "No. But for the last month, odd things have happened. Missing livestock, open gates, footprints in places no one normally goes. I told the sheriff, but nothing came of it. DeWitt nodded gravely. Our office intercepted communications, suggesting the local sheriff was paid off or otherwise influenced. If that's true, your prior complaints were probably swept under the rug. Ryan thought of Bill Whitaker, his father's longtime friend. It seemed impossible that the man who once joined them for family barbecues could be part of a criminal web. Yet the swirl of black SUVs and determined federal agents told him otherwise. Something was undeniably wrong in their county. "Agent," Ryan said quietly, pulling out his phone. "I took pictures of them, of the two men who threatened me. Maybe it'll help?" DeWitt's eyes lit with interest. "Yes, please show me." He studied the photos intently. "We've seen them before. Small-time enforcers for a bigger network. This is consistent with our intelligence." A pang of fear shot through Ryan. Those men were just foot soldiers. What if their bosses decided to come after him or his father? Sensing his anxiety, Mark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure this out." Before DeWitt could respond, another agent hurried over with a grim expression. "Sir, we found something near the far pasture. Buried boxes, looks like rifles, automatics, possibly more. We need you on site." DeWitt turned to Mark. "Stay here. We'll keep you updated. This is bigger than we thought." He hurried after his colleague, leaving father and son alone on the porch. Ryan looked at Mark, heart pounding again. "Dad, you think they were using our land to smuggle guns, without us having the slightest clue?" Mark exhaled slowly, glancing at the FBI vehicles scattered across the property. "I don't know, son, but we're in the thick of it now." As father and son watched the federal agents combing through the barns and fields, an uneasy realization settled in. Those hunters were a piece of a grander puzzle, a puzzle that put their livelihood, their safety, and maybe even their lives at risk. Mark's gaze drifted to the horizon he once viewed only with pride and hope. Now it held shadows he'd never noticed before. In a matter of hours, the entire farm had become the center of a federal operation. The question was, how far would these dark undercurrents reach into their once peaceful existence? Mark could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, even as he tried to maintain a calm exterior for Ryan's sake. The presence of so many federal agents crawling over every inch of the farm made him uneasy, but he understood the necessity. If smugglers had managed to stash contraband right under his nose, there was no telling how many times they might have come and gone without being detected. Every so often he caught a glimpse of men in dark jackets hoisting crates from shallow pits in the far pasture, their faces grim under the brightening morning sun. Agents conferred in low voices near the barn, scanning documents and comparing them against the inventory logs Mark provided. He had always been meticulous about farm records, but he never imagined the day he would need to prove his innocence with them. Ryan hovered by the porch railing, arms folded tightly across his chest. Even from a distance, Mark noticed his son's fingers trembling. The events of the last 24 hours had rattled them both. No father wants to see a rifle aimed at his child, and no kid expects to confront armed intruders on the property he considers home. Every time Mark looked at Ryan, the memory of that near miss made his own heart pound with renewed fear. But he forced himself to focus on practical concerns, cooperating with the authorities, figuring out what else might be hidden on the farm, and ensuring his family was safe from whatever threat lurked behind these revelations. Agent DeWitt reemerged from the pasture area, stepping briskly onto the porch. A fine sheen of sweat glistened on his brow, and his dark suit looked dusty from kneeling in the dirt. He flicked his gaze between Mark and Ryan. "We've uncovered multiple caches of firearms, rifles, ammunition, possibly some high-grade scopes. No sign of narcotics yet, but that doesn't mean they aren't here. You said you've seen unexplained tire tracks recently?" Mark nodded, clearing his throat. "Yes, mostly near the eastern edge by the woods. I assumed it was random trespassers or maybe teenage pranksters. Now I realize it might have been something worse." DeWitt seemed to weigh Mark's sincerity, then pulled out a small notepad. We'll send a team to comb that section of the property, too. Any old roads there or side paths not visible from the house? Ryan answered, voice tense. There's an abandoned logging trail that runs parallel to the creek. It's overgrown, but someone with a four-wheel drive could still navigate parts of it. I've seen fresh tire tracks along that path more than once, especially early in the mornings when the dew is thick. DeWitt jotted down a few notes, then looked at Ryan intently. You're the one who caught them in the act, right? Yesterday morning, near that same area? At Ryan's nod, the agent continued. Good instincts. You probably interrupted one of their drop-offs. We've had eyes on them for a while, but never enough to pinpoint where they were stashing the goods. Seems your land was convenient, remote enough, not a lot of traffic, and a sheriff who might have turned a blind eye. How deep does this go? Ryan asked, troubled. I mean, is the sheriff really involved in all this? A flicker of sympathy crossed DeWitt's otherwise stern features. We don't know the extent of his involvement yet. For now, we assume he's compromised. Sometimes people get in over their heads. Other times, they're just greedy. Either way, we'll find out soon. With that, DeWitt moved off again, barking orders into his radio. Another pair of agents arrived at the porch requesting permission to search the attic and crawl spaces. Mark handed over the keys to the storage rooms, cooperating as best he could while nerves thrummed through him. The situation felt surreal. His father's old home, where Mark himself had grown up, now a crime scene. When the racket of helicopter blades disturbed the hush of the countryside, Mark and Ryan looked up in alarm. A black chopper was descending into their largest field, blowing swirls of dust around the outbuildings. More federal reinforcements, apparently. The sudden flurry of movement sent the cows in the nearby paddock into a brief stampede of agitation, bellowing anxiously. Mark cursed under his breath, worried about his animals. He gestured for Ryan to help calm the livestock, and they jogged across the yard. Halfway there, an agent stopped them, insisting on an escort. That, of course, only underlined how big this had become. They reached the paddock, cooing gently to the nervous cows. Ryan patted the flank of one particularly agitated heifer, stroking its side until it settled. Mark cast a glance at the swirling dust where the helicopter had landed. A group of federal officers hopped out, one of them clad in a suit that looked more expensive than any garment Mark had ever worn. This newcomer's posture radiated authority as he conferred briefly with DeWitt. Though Mark was too far away to hear, he could sense the tension in their exchange. "Dad," Ryan murmured, "they're digging up half the farm. What if they find more weapons or drugs?" He hesitated, glancing at the row of old maple trees on the perimeter. What if these criminals come back? Mark's gut clenched at the question. Indeed, if the smugglers realized the FBI was onto them, they might attempt a desperate move. "One thing at a time," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "We're under federal protection now. They'll keep watch." Ryan's uneasy expression softened slightly, though a shadow of worry remained. Helping Mark soothe the cows provided a momentary sense of control, a small reminder of normal farm chores in the midst of chaos. When the animals had calmed, father and son stepped back out of the paddock, only to find Agent DeWitt waiting by the gate. "Mr. Prescott," he said quietly, "this is Special Agent in Charge Riley." He gestured to the man in the expensive suit, who offered Mark a firm handshake. "Pleased to meet you," Riley said, though his stern face showed no trace of a smile. "We're establishing a temporary command post here. Your property is now a central point in an ongoing federal operation. I know this is an intrusion, but we need full cooperation. We'll do our best to minimize damage and reimburse any losses. That said, we can't guarantee nothing will get broken or trampled in the process." Mark nodded, swallowing the urge to protest. "I understand," he replied, though the idea of strangers rummaging across every acre of his home felt like a terrible violation. "What do we need to do?" Riley flicked open a tablet, scanning through some data. We might ask you and your son to come to our field station for detailed statements, more than once if necessary. Also, it's possible you'll need protective measures. We don't yet know the scope of retaliation these criminals might attempt." "Protective measures?" Ryan echoed nervously. "Like relocation?" Riley considered him. "Let's not jump that far yet, but we're not ruling anything out. If the ring operating here is as dangerous as our intel suggests, we can't risk your safety. For the time being, do not leave the property without informing us. We'll maintain a perimeter. Anyone tries to come back, we'll know." Mark's lips tightened. He hated feeling powerless, forced to treat his own farm like a prison. Yet the alternative, wandering unprotected while criminals roamed, was worse. "All right," he said. "Whatever you need." Ryan cleared his throat, summoning courage. "If we're giving statements, can I tell you everything that's happened the last month? I've kept track of weird footprints, missing animals, even phone calls that never made sense. I wrote some of it down in case Dad needed to file an insurance claim." But the sheriff never seemed interested. Agent Riley's attention sharpened. "That log could be invaluable. Can you get it?" Ryan nodded. "I'll be right back," he said, heading toward the house at a quick trot. Passing the milling agents in the yard felt bizarre, like moving through an action movie set, a swirling mass of suits, bulletproof vests, and earnest faces scanning the horizon for danger. The entire yard was full of cables, crates, portable equipment, and even a makeshift canopy where a couple of technicians worked on laptops. Ryan skirted them carefully, entered the house, and dashed upstairs to his bedroom. There, he fished a battered spiral notebook from under his bed. He flipped through the pages to confirm everything was in place. Dates, times, rough sketches of tire tread patterns, notes on areas where fence wires had been cut. A pang of apprehension twisted in his stomach as he realized just how methodical these intruders had been. Now that the FBI was tearing the place apart, the question wasn't just who had used their land. It was how many times they'd done it, and what else had gone unnoticed for so long. By the time he rejoined his father, Riley, and DeWitt near the porch, the farm had fully transformed into a law enforcement staging ground. More agents were arriving, some unloading specialized search tools, others distributing large aerial photographs of the region. Hearing the hum of the helicopter overhead, Mark brushed off dust from his sleeves and exhaled a long, shaky breath. The chaos made him dizzy. He offered Ryan a tight, reassuring smile. Ryan handed the notebook to Riley. "Everything I noticed might be helpful." Riley accepted it with a curt nod. "Thank you, Ryan. This is more detailed than most people bother to record. You likely saved us time." The agent gestured at DeWitt. "Let's get this uploaded and cross-reference it with the contraband we found." As the agent strolled away, conferring in low tones, Ryan looked to Mark. "Dad, do you think they'll find more guns? More of those men?" Mark rubbed his chin. "If they do, we'll handle it. The best thing we can do is cooperate and keep our eyes open. These folks know what they're doing." An uneasy hush settled between them as they gazed across the once peaceful farmland, now brimming with black-clad figures rummaging through every structure, scanning the edges of every field. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something worse might be coming, that the men who aimed that silenced rifle at him wouldn't just walk away from a busted operation. Neither father nor son voiced those fears aloud, but the worry lingered in the charged air. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. Tension hovered like a storm cloud. Mark took a moment to reflect on simpler times. Only yesterday, he and Ryan had fixed the tractor's transmission, joking about rusted bolts and the kind of farm repairs that never ended. Now, the FBI presence dwarfed any normal daily chore. The day's events had rolled them straight from local rumor into a full-scale federal crisis. And though a part of Mark was relieved that the intruders had finally been exposed, another part of him felt a sinking dread about how quickly everything had escalated. Ryan set a hand on his father's shoulder. "At least we know now," he said softly. Maybe once this is over, things can go back to normal." Mark didn't reply. He wondered if anything would ever be normal again. Before he could speak, DeWitt reappeared, signaling them over. "We've got a major development," he announced, beckoning them to follow. "We just uncovered something near that old logging trail Ryan mentioned, a bunker or hidden cache. We need you to identify a few items. See if you recognize anything." Father and son exchanged wary glances. Together they trailed after DeWitt, each step heavier than the last. What they were about to see, they didn't know, but both sensed it would drag them further from the life they once knew and deeper into a web of danger none of them had asked for. They followed Agent DeWitt across a wide stretch of pasture until they reached the mouth of the old logging trail. Years of disuse had left the narrow lane overgrown with brambles, and Ryan recognized fresh tire ruts cut into the wet earth. The path wound deeper through the thickening woods, the late afternoon sun filtering through rustling leaves overhead. At the trail's first bend, a trio of FBI agents stood beside what appeared to be a buried cache. Dirt was freshly displaced, and an open wooden hatch led downward into darkness. A generator-powered floodlight illuminated a short tunnel that had clearly been reinforced with wooden beams. Mark exchanged a glance with Ryan, alarm rippling through him as he realized the level of organization this operation must have required. DeWitt gestured toward the open hatch. "Come with me. We'll keep it brief. I have a few items down there we'd like you to look at." They descended carefully, using a makeshift ladder propped against the opening. The space below smelled of damp earth and old wood. The corridor ran about 20 feet before ending in a small chamber. In that chamber, half a dozen crates sat stacked against the earthen walls. They were made of plain plywood, with nails hammered in rough lines. One crate had already been pried open, revealing neatly packed assault rifles lined up like grim puzzle pieces. Another contained boxes of ammunition. At the far side, a metal footlocker stood against the wall, its lid raised. Within it, Mark noticed a scattering of documents in plastic sleeves, each page carefully sealed. DeWitt lifted one of the documents and held it out for Mark to inspect. "These appear to be shipping manifests. It looks like codes, or maybe partial addresses. Any chance you've seen something like this around town, or recognize the pattern?" Mark shook his head, perplexed. "Nothing like that. I mind my own business. If these are shipping routes, it's news to me." Ryan took a hesitant step forward. A few pages had partially visible headings, referencing supplies like farm equipment and fertilizer, but the numerical codes beside them didn't match anything he was familiar with. Another agent shone a flashlight onto a cluster of smaller crates in the corner. "Check these," that agent said to DeWitt. "They're labeled as feedstock, but everything else suggests they're using that as cover. Might be contraband inside." "We'll get them open," DeWitt agreed, turning to Mark and Ryan. "I need you both to confirm something, though. Have you bought or sold any large volumes of fertilizer or feed in the last few months, outside your usual routine?" Mark bristled slightly, though he kept his tone civil. "No. I purchase my feed supplies through one local provider. Our volumes are consistent, and we don't sell fertilizer. We barely have enough for our own fields." Ryan rubbed his arms against the slight chill in the underground air. "Who built this bunker? Did they bring in heavy machinery? I'd have noticed the noise." An agent to the side, a tall woman with dark hair pulled back into a bun, answered quietly. "Likely done incrementally over time, at night, with minimal equipment so as not to attract attention. By the looks of the wood supports, they might have repurposed old barn lumber. You might check if anything's gone missing from your outbuildings." The idea that criminals had systematically built a hidden bunker on their land without them ever suspecting it made Mark feel foolish, and a spark of anger burned beneath his embarrassment. "They must have known we trusted the sheriff," he muttered. "They had to assume we'd call him, but he wouldn't do much about it." DeWitt nudged one crate's lid aside and examined the contents, We've found enough weaponry here to outfit a small militia. That's on top of what we already dug up in the fields. The smuggling ring you stumbled across has bigger ambitions than we thought." Ryan's breath caught in his throat, his mind darting to the day he confronted those men. He realized with a shudder that they might have been part of something truly vast, a network for funneling illegal firearms across the region. He forced himself to focus on what DeWitt was saying, rather than the swirl of panic building inside. "We'll document everything," DeWitt continued, "but I'd appreciate you two verifying you've never seen any of these items around the property." Mark lifted his hands. "I've never laid eyes on those crates. None of them belong to us." Ryan could see a hint of grim satisfaction in the agents' faces. They now had concrete evidence, ample grounds to pursue whoever orchestrated this. But Mark's and Ryan's concerns went beyond simply uncovering illegal goods. They wondered what would happen if the wrong people learned the Prescotts had assisted the FBI. In rural areas, word traveled fast, and alliances sometimes ran deep. If local authorities were compromised, who else might be on the payroll of these criminals? With a nod, DeWitt directed Mark and Ryan back up the ladder. Nightfall approached, and the forest canopy already made the bunker's interior grow darker by the minute. They emerged onto the trail, blinking in the fading light. More agents had arrived during their brief inspection, roping off the area with bright yellow tape. Once away from the cluster of feds, Ryan tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad," he said in a low voice, "what if these guys come looking for revenge? They have to know it's our farm. We can't just ignore the risk." Mark's jaw clenched. "We'll do what we have to do. Right now, I don't see any choice but to trust the FBI. We can't fight these criminals alone." Neither father nor son admitted how terrifying it felt. They had always believed that their close-knit community, with honest neighbors and everyday routines, was safe from the kind of organized crime typically seen on the nightly news. Now they had to confront the reality that a sophisticated operation had thrived right in their own backyard. Instead of dwelling on that dread, Mark pulled Ryan closer, resting a firm hand on his shoulder as they walked. It was a small act of comfort amid overwhelming uncertainty. Back at the main yard, Special Agent Riley was examining photos pinned to a portable bulletin board. He beckoned them over. "We pulled images from the contraband crates, some shipping labels, partial inscriptions. Do you recognize any of these names?" Mark narrowed his gaze at the grainy prints. A few brand markings looked vaguely agricultural, but he couldn't place them specifically. Ryan shook his head. "No. But that label there?" He pointed to a faint imprint. "It says Riverway Solutions. That's not a local feed store, is it?" Riley frowned. "No. We suspect it's a shell corporation used by the smugglers. This operation crosses state lines. They might be trucking in guns disguised as farm supplies." Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped aside to answer, only to see an unfamiliar number on the screen. He almost dismissed it, but a jolt of fear for extended family or neighbors made him press accept. "Hello?" A raspy voice spoke on the other end. "Keep your mouth shut," it said in a chilling whisper. "All of you. We know who you are and we know how to find you." Mark froze. The call ended before he could respond. He slowly lowered the phone, dread tightening in his chest like a vice. Ryan noticed his father's alarm. "Dad, what happened?" Mark glanced at Riley, who was eyeing him curiously. "Somebody just threatened us," he said quietly. "They said they know how to find us." Without hesitation, Riley gestured for an FBI tech to come over and trace the call. Meanwhile, Mark explained the brief exchange. The agent's face darkened. "We'll do a full forensic analysis on your phone. Did the caller say anything else?" "Just that we should keep quiet." "Then they're aware we're working with the Bureau," Riley said. "We'll escalate protective measures. Right now, we have no reason to believe they can breach our perimeter, but we're not taking chances." He glanced over his shoulder at the house. "Pack what you need for a few nights. We can set you up in a safe location until the immediate threat is contained. Alarm flared in Ryan's eyes. We have livestock. We can't just leave them for who knows how long. An older agent in plain clothes standing nearby spoke up. We can arrange for local, trusted farmhands to cover your chores, assuming you have recommendations. If not, we'll find professionals who can handle the basics. Mark despised the idea of abandoning his farm, but that phone call was no idle prank. He inhaled deeply. All right, we'll gather essentials, but I want a say in who tends these animals. They're my responsibility. Riley nodded, respecting Mark's demand. We'll do everything above board. Time is short, so get whatever medication, paperwork, or personal items you need. We leave before dark. Ryan cast a pained look around the yard. Two of their dogs prowled nervously, spooked by the influx of strangers in the roaring helicopter. The prospect of leaving them behind was as unsettling as everything else. We can't take both dogs with us? He asked, voice thin with worry. DeWitt overheard. We'll allow it if it makes you more comfortable, he offered. But it might be difficult to manage them at a secure site. Up to you. Mark and Ryan exchanged looks. The thought of forcibly separating from the dogs made Ryan's stomach churn. In the end, Mark sighed. We'll bring them. They'll be less trouble than we are, probably. The directive was clear. Agents spread out, confirming that no unauthorized persons lurked nearby. Mark and Ryan hurried inside. Ryan rummaged for clothes, personal mementos, anything that couldn't be replaced. Mark grabbed a battered duffel bag and stuffed in important documents: birth certificates, property deeds, old photographs. He hesitated over the family photo album his father had compiled decades ago, then slid it in as well. Downstairs, he emptied the gun safe, handing each weapon over to an agent for safekeeping. The house, once so cozy, felt cold and unwelcoming amid the swirl of federal watchers. Outside, darkness began to seep across the horizon, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Another helicopter soared overhead, its searchlight sweeping the fields, turning the farmland into an illuminated stage. Agents guided Mark and Ryan into a black SUV with tinted windows. Ryan held the dogs close, trying to soothe them. Mark stared through the window at the only home he'd ever known, heart heavy with the sense that they might not see it again for a long time. The convoy pulled away from the house, an armored vehicle leading the way. As they rolled down the gravel driveway, a swirl of dust rose behind the tires, catching the headlights in a ghostly haze. Ryan took one last glimpse at the barn. The usual quiet, peaceful silhouette beneath the moon was now overshadowed by floodlights, official trucks, and half a dozen armed figures guarding the perimeter. Never had the farm looked so foreign. "Dad," Ryan murmured, voice trembling with the weight of everything. "Are we doing the right thing?" Mark swallowed hard, gaze fixed forward. "Staying would be too dangerous. This is the only choice we have." Ryan leaned back against the seat, heart pounding. As the SUV picked up speed, the farmland receded into the distance, replaced by the shadowy outlines of country roads. In his chest, a storm of emotions raged: fear, anger, and the longing for normalcy he wasn't sure he'd ever feel again. At least they were together, father and son, determined to protect each other in a crisis they never saw coming. They drove deeper into the night, bound for an uncertain destination. For Mark and Ryan Prescott, everything familiar was left behind in that dust cloud on the road. What lay ahead was a new reality that would test their courage, their loyalty to one another, and their hope that someday they could return to the only home they knew, once it was safe again. The convoy sped along winding roads, headlights carving through the deepening darkness. Mark had no idea where they were headed, but he noticed the FBI agents up front, glancing at GPS coordinates. The presence of armed escorts and encrypted radios felt unreal, like he and Ryan had stumbled into a spy thriller. Occasionally, An agent's radio would crackle with confirmation from the unit still at the farm, updating everyone on ongoing security checks. Mark's palms felt clammy. He stared out the SUV window at passing silhouettes of trees and fields, unsure when, or if, he and Ryan would see home again. Ryan sat quietly in the back seat, his arms wrapped around the two dogs as best he could. The canines, sensing tension, huddled close, occasionally letting out anxious whines. Mark glanced over and squeezed his son's shoulder. It wasn't the comfort of home, but it was something. Ryan offered a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, then turned his gaze back out into the night. After what felt like an hour of driving, the vehicles rolled past a gated checkpoint. Armed guards waved them through, and a faint glimmer of floodlights in the distance suggested some kind of facility. Eventually, the SUVs pulled up to a squat, nondescript building, constructed of cinder block and concrete. Another set of uniformed officers met them at the entrance. Special Agent Riley exited first, speaking in low tones with a tall woman wearing a badge that said, U.S. Marshal. Whatever was said caused her to nod with an air of seriousness, and she motioned Mark and Ryan to follow her inside. They stepped into a plain hallway, the overhead lights stark against white walls. The agent leading them, her hair pulled back in a precise bun, offered an attempt at a reassuring smile. My name's Deputy Marshal Tyler, she said. This is a secure facility. You'll each have a room with basic amenities. We'll do everything we can to accommodate you and your dogs. Mark felt a wave of relief at how calm her tone was. But a new question formed in his mind. How long do we stay here? Tyler's polite smile flickered slightly. Depends. The FBI is working quickly, but until the threat level is deemed manageable, we don't want you leaving. We'll keep you updated. Ryan glanced around. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant, like a hospital corridor. Through open doors, he saw small, windowless rooms furnished with a single bed, a metal table, and chairs. Although not as grim as a jail, it felt institutional. Will we be alone here? He asked, voice uncertain. You'll be in a controlled section, Tyler replied, leading them to a pair of rooms side by side. There may be other protected individuals in separate wings, but no one has access to you without clearance. Meals, any medical care, or personal items you need, we can arrange. Mark inhaled slowly, hating the confinement, but recognizing the necessity. Understood, he said with a nod. We appreciate the help. Then, thinking of practical matters, he added, what about contacting family or friends? People might worry if they can't reach us. Tyler's expression turned sympathetic. We can discuss monitored calls to close family members, but we must ensure no location details slip out. It's a security measure, and we strongly advise against telling anyone where you are. A chill ran through Mark. The reality of being under protective custody was hitting him full force. All right, he said quietly. We'll do whatever it takes to keep Ryan safe. Deputy Marshal Tyler ushered them to the nearest room, letting them drop off a few belongings. The dogs stuck close by, panting nervously, tails low. Ryan scratched behind their ears, murmuring reassuring words. Then Tyler gave them a brief tour of the corridor, a small break room where they could get coffee or water, a secure door at the end that led to a larger facility. Off limits, without an escort. It all felt so abrupt, so strange. Yesterday they'd woken on their peaceful farm, tending chores. Now they found themselves in a government safe site, uncertain of the future. Within half an hour, Mark and Ryan settled into their tiny rooms. Each had a single bed with gray sheets, a modest dresser, and a desk. The dogs curled up on the floor by Ryan's bed. Mark promised he'd check on Ryan regularly, though the deputy marshals told them they were free to move around the hall as they liked, as long as they stayed within the secured zone. It was better than nothing, Mark figured, but still restrictive. Exhaustion weighed on him, so he decided to lie down for a minute and collect his thoughts. His mind spun with worry for the farm, for what might still be hidden in those fields, for the criminals who now knew who they were. Just as Mark's eyes started to close, his door opened with a polite knock. He jolted upright, half expecting some emergency. Instead, Special Agent DeWitt stood there, holding a manila folder. Behind him was Deputy Marshal Tyler. Mark stood, raking a hand through his hair. "Something wrong?" he asked. DeWitt shook his head. "We'd like to get a full statement from you both, detailing everything you've seen or experienced over the last few months. I've already spoken with Ryan for a few minutes, but I need more detail from you. You up for it now?" "Sure," Mark said, forcing a weary smile. "Better to get it done while everything's still fresh in my mind." Tyler nodded. "We can use the interview room. Nothing formal, just a secure space to talk." Mark followed them down the corridor to a small chamber with a table and a few chairs. DeWitt clicked on a digital recorder, set the folder down, and offered Mark a bottle of water. The agent's voice carried a professional calm. "Let's start with how you discovered something was amiss, even before Ryan confronted those trespassers. Any unusual incidents stand out?" Mark rubbed his chin, thinking back. "Well, about a month ago, I noticed a couple of our cattle were gone. 2 heifers disappeared without a trace. I thought they might have wandered off, but we never found them, alive or dead. The sheriff wrote it up as rustling or a wild animal attack, but nothing came of it." DeWitt nodded, scribbling notes. "Did you notice any forced gates or cut fences?" "Yes, a few. We chalked it up to petty vandalism. Then fences were found cut near the eastern boundary, right where Ryan spotted footprints later on. The sheriff didn't investigate beyond taking a quick look." "Any suspicious vehicles before the black SUVs you saw today?" DeWitt prompted. Mark sighed. "Once, Ryan said he saw a white van idling near the woods, but by the time I got out there, it was gone. I never got a look at it." The interview continued, touching on every oddity Mark could recall. DeWitt pressed for specifics, dates, times, even the weather on those days. Finally, the agent clicked off the recorder and tapped the folder. "This is consistent with a pattern we've traced in a few other rural communities," he explained. "They start small, trespassing, petty theft, sabotage, until they've mapped out a reliable route. Then they escalate to major smuggling. In your case, it looks like they picked your land for weapons storage. The missing livestock could have been a test run to see if they could cross the property without drawing much attention." Mark's anger ignited anew, though he kept his tone controlled. "They treated my home like a highway rest stop for illegal guns, and they bribed or intimidated local law enforcement into staying quiet." DeWitt inclined his head. "That's the working theory. We suspect the sheriff was either paid off or threatened, but until we locate him, we can't confirm which. We'll need you and Ryan to be prepared for possible testimony if this goes to trial." "Whatever it takes," Mark answered. His mind drifted to the phone call warning him to keep quiet. He steeled himself. It'd take more than a threat to stop him from telling the truth and protecting his son. "You have my full cooperation." "Thank you," DeWitt said sincerely. "Now I won't keep you longer tonight. We'll debrief again in the morning. Do you have any questions for me?" Mark hesitated, then voiced a question that had been gnawing at him for hours. "How real is the danger to Ryan? If these criminals want to retaliate, are we truly safe here?" DeWitt's gaze flickered with understanding. "We don't take chances with witness safety. This facility is off the grid. Only a handful of people know the location. Even if they suspect you're in federal custody, they won't know where. We have armed marshals on duty 24/7. It reassured Mark slightly, but didn't fully lift the burden on his heart. "All right," he said at last. "I appreciate everything you're doing." With that, DeWitt walked him back to his room. Ryan was in the hallway petting the dogs. The agent extended a polite nod to Ryan as well, then strode off with Deputy Marshal Tyler to presumably continue orchestrating security protocols. Ryan raised his eyes to Mark, voice low. "You finish with them?" Mark nodded. "Yeah, they'll talk to us both more in the morning, I'm sure." Ryan lingered as if unsure what to do. The institutional setting offered no real comfort, just fluorescent lights and bare walls. "Dad," he said softly, "I'm scared." Mark folded him in a firm hug, dogs nosing at their legs. "Me too, son," he admitted, "but we're in the right place. They won't let anything happen to us here." They retreated into Ryan's assigned room. The dogs sprawled on the floor, tails thumping at the human company. Mark noticed Ryan had set out a small framed photo of himself and his mother, who had passed away years ago. It was a cherished keepsake. Ryan's eyes flicked to it, and Mark understood the unspoken reminder. Their family had already endured heartbreak before. They had survived that tragedy, and they would survive this too. Somehow. Before they parted for the night, Mark sat on the edge of Ryan's bed. "I wish I had answers, but all we can do is trust the FBI right now. Let them do their job." Ryan's brow was furrowed. "What about school? I'm going into my senior year. Everything's up in the air." "We'll figure it out. The FBI can arrange a tutor, maybe. It's not ideal, but we'll manage." Exhaustion weighed on them. Mark stood, gave the dogs a reassuring pat, and left his son to rest. Back in his own barren room, he tried to fall asleep. Waves of restless thoughts rolled through his mind. Each time he closed his eyes, he pictured the farm under bright floodlights, men with guns lurking in the shadows. He worried about the cattle, about whether the criminals would sabotage something out of spite, about the many possible disasters. Yet, at some point near midnight, weariness overtook him, and he slipped into fitful slumber. He dreamed of the farm the way it used to be. Quiet fields lit by morning sun, the rhythmic hum of the tractor, Ryan running across the meadow with a soccer ball. It was peaceful. Then the sudden thunder of helicopter blades tore through the sky, scattering the livestock. A black SUV roared across the field, leaving a trail of churned mud and destruction. Mark shouted, but no sound came from his mouth, and he could only watch the scene unfold in helpless dread. He woke up breathing hard, the sterile walls reminding him of his new reality. There were no windows to check the dawn, only a closed door and the hum of ventilation. A digital clock read 6:02 a.m. His body ached from the rigid mattress. For a long moment, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his eyes, wondering if life would ever be the same again. With a resolve born from necessity, he stood, squared his shoulders, and stepped out into the hall. At the very least, he could check on Ryan and the dogs, maybe grab some coffee from the break room. The day ahead promised another round of interviews, more updates on the farm, and uncertain news about the criminals. But Mark Prescott would face it all, determined to protect the only family he had left and to reclaim his home from the darkness that had seeped in under his watch. Morning brought no relief from the sterile hush of the protected facility. Mark woke early, as he had every day for most of his life, but without the comforting routines of farm chores. Instead, he stepped into the deserted corridor and made his way to the break room, where a pot of coffee sat half full on a burner. He poured a cup and sipped slowly, grimacing at the bitterness. No matter how good the brew, it wasn't the same as a sunrise over his fields with Ryan feeding the chickens. He lingered there, bracing one hand against the counter as he tried to gather his wits for whatever new interrogation or update the FBI had in store. The previous day's anxiety still clung to him. Each breath felt tight, as though at any moment some fresh crisis might erupt. He understood that cooperating was the surest path to regaining control of his life, but patience had never been his strong suit. The wait for new information gnawed at him. After a minute, he returned to Ryan's room. The door was ajar. Inside, Ryan was tugging on a t-shirt and fumbling around for his sneakers. Their two dogs lifted their heads from their spot by the dresser, tails thumping. Mark offered a sympathetic smile. "How'd you sleep?" Ryan shrugged, looking exhausted despite the early hour. Not great. Kept dreaming about the farm. In one dream, I swear I could hear the tractor running, but when I walked outside, there was just this huge hole in the ground, like that bunker we found. He trailed off, his expression telling the rest. Mark nodded in understanding. I had nightmares too, he admitted. One step at a time, all right? Today we'll find out more. Ryan forced a small nod and followed Mark out into the hallway. They decided to visit the break room for breakfast, and along the way they passed a pair of U.S. Marshals conferring near a locked office. The men gave them courteous nods but shared no details. Their clipped conversation hinted at an ongoing investigation, exactly the sort of hush-hush environment Mark had expected. A short time later, Deputy Marshal Tyler approached, holding a clipboard. "Morning," she greeted, offering a subdued smile. "If you want hot food, there's a kitchen 1 floor down. I can escort you. After that, Agents DeWitt and Riley want to see you both for a follow-up." Mark glanced at Ryan, who nodded. They were hungry, and a real meal beat the stale granola bars that had been in the break room basket. They followed Tyler down a stairwell, the dogs trailing anxiously, claws clicking on the steps. On the lower level, they entered a small cafeteria. Functional, but at least it smelled of eggs and toast. They grabbed trays, each selecting simple portions: scrambled eggs, bacon for Ryan, and a side of fruit. Mark noticed the hush among the few other people seated. He spotted 2 men who looked like financial professionals, probably another set of protected witnesses from an unrelated case, and a woman with a baby who seemed exhausted beyond words. No one spoke. The sense of tension hovered like a permanent fog. Sitting down, Mark and Ryan ate quickly, exchanging only quiet remarks. The dogs nibbled from a bit of bacon. Ryan sneaked them beneath the table. Halfway through the meal, DeWitt appeared, looking more rumpled than usual. He motioned for them to finish and followed them back upstairs. The agent escorted father and son to a different office than before. This one had a large window overlooking a fenced-in parking lot. The morning sun lit the modest space with a pale glow. Riley was waiting inside, tapping a pen on a thick file. He gestured for them to sit. "We have updates," he began, voice somber. "Our field teams uncovered more contraband in that bunker. We also discovered new footprints beyond the perimeter your son mentioned. Fresh ones. We believe multiple individuals fled the area right before our arrival." Ryan tightened his grip on the armrest. "So they were on our farm right before you got there?" "Seems so," DeWitt confirmed. "Tracks in the mud indicate at least 3 or 4 men. They left no vehicles behind. Maybe they stashed them farther out or had rides waiting. Regardless, they're still at large." Mark's stomach nodded. "And the sheriff, any word?" Riley shook his head grimly. "Not yet. We have a bolo out for him. Local tips keep trickling in, but we suspect he might be lying low. If he's complicit, he could be dangerous. Or he might have realized the heat was on and fled for his life." DeWitt leaned forward. "We're also analyzing the call you received. Our tech team traced it to a burner phone, unregistered. Nothing conclusive except that it pinged off a nearby cell tower. The caller was close when they placed the threat." Ryan felt a chill at that revelation. They were that near to us? Could they still be in the county? "Likely," DeWitt said. "And we suspect they'll look for ways to retaliate or regain any hidden contraband. If they realize how much we've seized, they might be desperate." Mark blew out a shaky breath. "So what's the plan? How long do you need us to stay here?" The 2 agents exchanged a glance. Then Riley answered, "We'll keep you here until we're sure the threat is contained. We're working with other federal and state agencies to identify ringleaders. Once we dismantle the group, we can talk about letting you return home." Ryan stared at the floor. "I start my senior year of high school soon. If this drags on for months, it'll ruin everything." Mark put a hand on his shoulder, but Riley's tone stayed professional. "We can't promise a quick resolution, but we'll do everything possible to expedite. In the meantime, we'll coordinate with the local school board if needed. or arrange an alternative. A surge of frustration swelled in Mark's chest. He cleared his throat. "We'll comply, but please understand how devastating this is for us." DeWitt nodded. "We do, Mr. Prescott, and I promise we won't keep you in the dark. We've begun questioning some local suspects. There may be a few who know about the smuggling routes. If they cooperate, we might track down the men who threatened you." Riley tapped the file on the desk. "We also found logs in that bunker detailing multiple shipments delivered across state lines. Looks like your property was just one hub. They might have farmland in 2 or 3 other counties under their control as well. This network is bigger than we initially realized." Mark gritted his teeth. "That doesn't surprise me. If they manage to compromise a sheriff, they're well connected." Nodding, DeWitt closed his notepad. "We won't keep you any longer right now, but be on standby. We may have more questions soon. Rest. Contact us if you need anything. And again, we appreciate your cooperation." Mark and Ryan returned to the hallway, a silent tension between them. The dogs waited patiently, wagging in subdued greeting. Mark knelt and rubbed their ears. "Guess we'll be here a while, guys," he murmured. He glanced up at Ryan. "You holding up okay?" Ryan shrugged, tears threatening to form, though he blinked them away. "I don't know, it's just... everything feels turned upside down." He cleared his throat. "But I'm okay, just worried. The farm is all we've ever known." "Me too," Mark said softly. "Let's try to stay positive." They walked back to their assigned rooms. The hours dragged, punctuated only by the occasional footstep of a marshal walking the halls or the hum of the overhead lights. Ryan spent some time on his phone, which had heavily restricted functionality here. No calling out, but at least he could message a couple of pre-approved contacts. He shot a quick text to his best friend, Liam, simply saying he wouldn't be around for a while, that there was a family emergency. It was a poor explanation, but it was all he could offer. Meanwhile, Mark paced restlessly, occasionally stepping out to see if there was fresh news. By midday, Deputy Marshal Tyler informed them lunch was available in the small cafeteria. They reconvened, father and son, trays in hand. The hush in the dining area was the same. 1 or 2 faces from earlier were gone, presumably moved or finished with their business. Mark and Ryan barely tasted the food, their minds too occupied. When they finished, Mark asked Tyler if they could go outside for even a few minutes, maybe just to let the dogs walk around. She consulted her radio, then nodded. "We can arrange a short trip to the secure courtyard. It's not large, but it's open air." That sounded like heaven to Ryan, who missed the feel of grass underfoot. They followed Tyler through 2 locked doors and a hallway ending at a fenced courtyard. It was maybe 50 feet by 30, surrounded by high walls topped with barbed wire. Still, sunlight spilled in, and a strip of well-tended lawn provided a small patch of green. Ryan's face brightened as he let the dogs roam on leashes, sniffing curiously at the corners. Mark took a deep breath, eyes drifting up to the sky. A handful of clouds sailed by in an otherwise blue expanse. For a moment, he let that calm wash over him, remembering how every day on the farm started with a view of sunrise over the fields. He pictured the morning light touching the tops of corn stalks, the crows perched on the fence line. That normal life felt a world away. They spent maybe 15 minutes out there, and then Tyler signaled it was time to head back in. Ryan reluctantly tugged on the dogs' leashes, guiding them toward the door. As they re-entered the building, Mark tried to hold on to the minor respite that patch of sky had provided. He needed to be strong for Ryan, and to trust that the FBI would dismantle the ring swiftly so they could return home. Late afternoon approached, with no fresh revelations. Mark decided to pass the time by playing a few card games with Ryan in the break room. They found a deck of cards in a drawer, and though the activity was a weak stand-in for the tasks they were accustomed to, it distracted them briefly. The dogs napped at their feet. Occasionally a deputy or an agent walked by, offering a polite hello, but no updates. Near dusk, Riley found them at the table mid-game. His expression was guarded. "We picked up someone we believe may be connected to your situation," he said in a measured tone. "No guarantee it leads us to the ringleaders, but it's progress." Mark set his cards down. "Who is it?" Riley hesitated, then replied, "A deputy from the sheriff's office. She claims ignorance, but we suspect she's aware of certain deals that went down. With luck, she'll point us in the right direction." Ryan leaned forward, a tremor in his voice. "Does that mean we can go home soon?" Riley's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not yet. She's only one piece of a puzzle. But if we flip enough of them, we'll see the full picture. Once we have the top players in custody, we'll reevaluate your security." Mark tried to keep frustration from his tone. "All right. Let us know if there's anything else we can do." The agent gave a curt nod and withdrew, leaving father and son to stare at each other in uneasy silence. Mark resumed the card game, but his focus was shot. Ryan, likewise, barely seemed to care about winning. The tension in the air was thick and unrelenting, a reminder that their normal life was suspended, subject to forces they couldn't control. That night, father and son retreated to their rooms, preparing to endure another restless sleep. Mark lay awake, the overhead fluorescent off, only a small lamp burning. The dogs were with Ryan, which he didn't mind. The animals gave Ryan comfort. Staring at the drab ceiling, Mark wondered if any piece of the farmland was still unsearched, if more hidden caches might lurk, and if the criminals who had threatened them were already plotting an ambush somewhere beyond the facility walls. He eventually dozed off, only to jolt awake hours later from another nightmare. This time, the farm was ablaze, and no one came to help. Sweat clung to his shirt. The lamp still shone dimly. Outside in the hall, footsteps passed, and he strained to listen for any sign of bad news. Nothing. Just the hush of a place designed to hide people who couldn't be safe anywhere else. At length, he forced himself to lie back down. With the dogs absent, the bed felt emptier. Mark told himself that the FBI would bring these smugglers to justice, that eventually they'd drive back up their gravel road and see their farmhouse standing as always. One day they'd walk the fields again under a quiet sky. He clung to that image, letting it lull him into a fitful rest. A father determined to protect his son until they could finally go home. Morning found Mark already awake, lying on top of the stiff gray sheets in his assigned room. Over the past few days, sleep had become more of a weary surrender than true rest, and each dawn delivered only a deeper sense of disconnection. There were no roosters crowing, no clatter of feed buckets to pull him from his slumber. Instead, the hum of fluorescent lighting and the distant shuffle of U.S. Marshals in the hall reminded him that he was far from the life he'd always known. He rose slowly, rubbing gritty eyes, and pulled on a clean shirt. Outside, the corridor felt stagnant, with doors identical to his lining both sides. The dogs had spent another night in Ryan's room, and Mark prayed they were helping to calm his son's nightmares. When he found Ryan, the teenager was seated cross-legged on the narrow bed, the dogs resting with muzzles on his lap. Ryan's eyes were puffy, as though he hadn't slept more than a couple of hours. He glanced up, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his face. "Morning, Dad," he murmured. "Any news?" Mark shook his head, stepping into the small space and gently patting one of the dogs on the flank. "None yet. I guess we should check in with the Marshals soon." He noticed a half-eaten protein bar on the desk beside an untouched bottle of water. His fatherly instincts kicked in. "We'll head down for a real breakfast. You need more than this." They made their way down the now familiar corridor to the elevator that took them to the small cafeteria. Deputy Marshal Tyler was there, sipping coffee by a row of beverage dispensers. She greeted them with a nod. "Morning. How are you two holding up?" Ryan shrugged while Mark said, "We're here." He cleared his throat. "Any word on that deputy you picked up? You said she might lead you to bigger fish." Tyler glanced at the tablet in her hand. She's talking, but it's slow. So far, we've only confirmed certain hush payments from an unknown source. Seems the sheriff was involved more heavily than we feared. She exhaled a quiet sigh. But that's all the detail I have. The agents might tell you more once they finish verifying her statements. Mark nodded curtly, bracing himself for another day of partial truths and indefinite waiting. He and Ryan grabbed trays, collecting eggs and toast that looked passably warm. They sat at a corner table, the dogs dozing at their feet, and tried to focus on each bite. Eating felt like a hollow gesture. Both father and son frequently glanced at the cafeteria door, half expecting Riley or DeWitt to stride in with a grim expression and new revelations. Their tension didn't ease until they finished breakfast and decided to take the dogs outside for a short walk in the fenced courtyard. Morning light filtered over the high concrete walls, and a breeze carried faint hints of summer. It wasn't the open farmland they loved, but it was something. The dogs sniffed around while father and son stood near the fence, gazing at a slice of sky. Ryan scuffed a sneaker against the ground. "Dad," he began, voice subdued, "I've been thinking about how the future might look if this goes on a while. I mean, everything about senior year. College applications, scholarships, it's all up in the air." Mark's gut twisted, empathy mingling with his own frustration. "I know, son. This is the worst possible timing. But we'll figure out a way to keep you on track with school. Maybe the marshals or the FBI can set up remote classes or bring in a tutor." Ryan's nod was uncertain. He gazed at the sky for a moment. "Maybe. I just hate feeling powerless, like my life is on hold because of these criminals." Mark laid a hand on his shoulder. "Trust me, I share that feeling." He paused. "But we're doing the right thing by cooperating. If we can help nail these guys, we'll get back to the farm sooner. Then you can resume your normal routine." Ryan's expression clouded. "Normal," he echoed softly, as though uncertain the word still applied. Before Mark could answer, the courtyard door opened. An agent Mark only vaguely recognized stepped out, scanning for them. "There you are," the man said. "Special Agent DeWitt wants you upstairs in interview room C. They've got new intel." A meaningful glance at the dogs. "You can bring them if you want, or we can watch them for you." Ryan decided to keep the dogs close, so they all returned inside. The agent led them through a maze of corridors until they reached a room different from the earlier ones. This space was smaller and featured a large computer monitor on the wall, presumably for displaying documents or photos. DeWitt stood by the monitor, arms folded, while Riley typed on a laptop at the table. Both men wore tense expressions that told Mark the news was serious. "Thanks for coming," DeWitt said as soon as they entered. "We'll keep this brief, but we've had a breakthrough. The deputy we arrested, Christine Lopez, finally named names. She claims a known enforcer, Miguel Sáenz, was in the county on behalf of a major trafficking network. Sáenz is rumored to be the one controlling contraband routes in your area." Mark recognized the name from local gossip that typically circulated about criminals downstate. It was unnerving to learn one of them had made it this far north. "So he's the boss of those men with rifles?" "More likely he's a mid-level boss," Riley clarified. "But from what we gather, he wields significant power. That might explain how they built a hidden bunker on your land and bribed or threatened the sheriff." Ryan fiddled with the leash in his hands. "So is this Sáenz the one who threatened us over the phone? Or was that just some henchman?" DeWitt nodded grimly. "Could be either. The phone trace was inconclusive, but Sáenz is known for intimidation tactics. If he thinks you can identify him, he'll want to silence you." A pang of fear rippled through Mark, but he forced himself to remain steady. "What's your next move?" Riley stepped over to the monitor, tapping a key. An image flashed on the screen. A grainy photo of a stocky man in his late 30s, dark hair combed back, wearing an expensive suit. "That's Sáenz. We're distributing his likeness to local and state enforcement. With any luck, We'll track him down soon. There's a chance he's fled the region, but we're not sure. If you see or hear anything about him, let us know immediately." Mark studied the photo, committing the face to memory. He could almost imagine that man striding around the farmland after dusk, barking orders at his subordinates. The thought made his skin crawl. "We'll be on alert," he promised, "but we're at your facility. Not sure what else we can do." "That's enough for now," Riley said, shutting off the screen. "We wanted you to know we're making progress. We also uncovered more evidence from the bunker, paper trails linking Science's operation to shipments that might cross state lines. It's turning into a major case, so don't be surprised if federal prosecutors get involved soon. Your testimonies could be crucial." Ryan swallowed. Testimonies. Right. Despite the tension, Mark admired his son's resilience. Even as fear flickered across Ryan's features, he stood tall, nodding. "We'll do it." DeWitt offered a faint smile. "Your cooperation has helped us piece this puzzle together faster than expected. I know it's hard on you, but we appreciate it." The conversation ended on that note, and father and son were escorted out. Another day passed in a haze of waiting. Afternoon shadows, a second short walk in the courtyard, dinner in the cafeteria. Mark dreaded each night's approach, fearing more sleepless hours and anxious thoughts. But as the evening wore on, Riley reappeared once again, summoning Mark to a different room. This time it was a spacious office with a proper desk. The windows overlooked a back lot where 2 black SUVs were parked. "Mr. Prescott," Riley began, motioning for Mark to sit, "we're stepping up efforts to apprehend Sayans. We have a lead indicating he might still be within 100 miles. Agents across multiple counties are deploying. That means I'll be out in the field starting tomorrow. DeWitt will remain your main contact here." Mark nodded slowly, not entirely sure how it affected him. "All right. Good luck out there." Riley leaned forward. "There's something else. We've identified at least one more property used as a stash site in a neighboring county. If it checks out the way we suspect, it confirms the scale of this ring is massive, and your land was just a piece of it. It likely explains how they had resources to bribe a sheriff." Mark sighed. "That's consistent with what we found. But that doesn't solve the question of when Ryan and I can go home." Riley's gaze dropped momentarily before returning to Mark. "I understand. Until we neutralize Sayans and his immediate associates, it's unsafe. However, we're discussing a possibility. If we find enough evidence to arrest the entire top tier of the operation quickly, we can guarantee your safety sooner. But it's a gamble. If they slip away, you remain at risk." Mark processed that with a bitter taste in his mouth. "You're basically saying we might be stuck here for weeks or months unless you can snare them fast." Riley hesitated. "That's the reality. But we're putting every resource we have into this. I wanted to be straightforward so you understand our position." He spread his hands in a helpless gesture. Weariness and resignation battled in Mark's mind. "I appreciate the honesty. My son's future, his school, it's all in limbo." He ran a hand through his hair, focusing on the modest reflection he caught in the window. "But I also don't want him shot in our own barnyard. We'll stay as long as we have to." "Thank you," Riley said softly. "We'll keep you posted on every development." With that, Mark walked back to find Ryan in the break room, flipping idly through channels on a small television. The teen looked up, eyes questioning. Mark explained everything Riley had said, bracing for Ryan's disappointment. "True enough," Ryan huffed, setting the remote down. "So we're just stuck again." Mark settled beside him. "I'd rather be stuck and safe than out there with criminals on the prowl." Ryan fiddled with the hem of his shirt. "Yeah, I know. It just feels like our entire life got hijacked." Mark squeezed his son's shoulder, acknowledging the truth of it. The dogs wandered over, as if sensing tension, and Ryan patted their heads. In that small comfort, father and son found a hint of solace, an anchor against the swirl of frustration and fear. The evening crawled forward, each minute stretching into an hour, and they soon turned in for the night. Yet again, Mark had difficulty sleeping. He dozed off only to wake around 2 in the morning, an uneasy feeling knotted in his chest. Something about the quiet corridors, the hum of distant ventilation, and the knowledge that men like Syons were still free weighed heavily on him. He got up, padded into the hallway, and found it empty except for a single marshal at the far end, glancing at him with mild surprise. Mark just nodded and continued wandering, eventually locating a small lounge near the front of the building. He spent an hour there, thinking of the farm, imagining how the rows of corn must look in the moonlight, remembering the old tractor's rattle, and yearning to see the place for himself. Every memory reminded him of what was at stake. If protecting Ryan meant staying in a secure facility indefinitely, so be it. Yet he couldn't shake a gnawing worry. What if the criminals destroyed or sold off everything they couldn't hide, leaving the Prescotts with a devastated home? Such thoughts threatened to drive him mad, so he forced himself to concentrate on the FBI's progress, praying that in the morning some fresh lead would bring them one step closer to shutting this ring down. Eventually, exhaustion sent him back to bed, where he drifted between uneasy dreams and half-conscious dread, determined not to let the shadows of fear eclipse his hope for a return to the life they both loved. Over the next 2 days, life at the safe site settled into a repetitive pattern that neither Mark nor Ryan could have anticipated. Each morning began with the same fluorescent glow overhead and a quick bite in the cafeteria. Most of the time, the father and son stuck together, pacing the hallways or taking the dogs into the walled courtyard. Though the marshals and FBI agents tried to maintain polite boundaries, there was no escaping the sense that Mark and Ryan were under constant watch. It was a protective cage, more comfortable than a prison cell, but just as isolating. They heard little from Agent Riley, who had left to pursue leads in the field. DeWitt and Deputy Marshal Tyler gave them periodic updates, but those mostly consisted of general statements. The investigation was ongoing. New evidence had been discovered. More arrests might follow soon. Each new tidbit of information felt like a tiny crack in the wall that blocked their return home. Every day, Mark reminded Ryan that the only way to break that wall entirely was to remain patient, to trust the process, and to believe the authorities would catch Syons and dismantle the smuggling ring. As the hours ticked by, Mark often found himself hovering over the break room's weak coffee, staring at the bland walls and wishing he were back in his own kitchen. He missed the earthy smell of his fields after a morning rain, the warmth of real sunlight on his face without any barbed wire fence overhead. Ryan was quieter than ever, curling up with the dogs in the corner of the break room, or doodling in a notebook. Sometimes Mark would catch him staring at the pages without actually drawing, lost in his own thoughts. They had never been idle people. Farm life was all about movement. Now they were stuck in forced inactivity, each day creeping into the next. Late one afternoon, a soft knock at Mark's door roused him from a half-doze. Deputy Marshal Tyler stood in the hallway, an odd look on her face, some combination of concern and tension. "Could you and Ryan come with me?" she asked. "Agent DeWitt has some important news." Mark followed her down the corridor, heart pounding. Ryan joined them, exchanging a worried glance with his father. When they reached the conference room at the far end of the building, they found DeWitt already seated, a laptop open in front of him. His expression was tense, but he forced a professional calm as he motioned for them to sit. "I'll cut straight to it," DeWitt began. "We have credible intelligence that someone involved in Syons's operation may be searching for ways to access this facility's location. We don't believe they have it yet, but we can't ignore the threat." He folded his hands, glancing from Mark to Ryan. "We're taking extra precautions." Mark felt a chill. "They're looking for us?" he asked, though the question was more of a grim confirmation than a genuine inquiry. DeWitt's jaw tightened. "We suspect so, yes. We've made progress dismantling pieces of their network, and they're desperate. We believe Cyans himself is still in the region. If he finds out precisely where we're holding you, he might try something reckless." Ryan swallowed. "So what does that mean for us?" Tyler spoke up, her voice carefully measured. "We're moving you to a different safe site. Tonight." For a moment, Mark let the statement sink in. Another relocation, more uncertainty, more distance from home. He inhaled slowly. "All right," he said, forcing himself to remain calm. "If that's what it takes to keep Ryan safe, we'll do it." Ryan's face paled at the idea of packing up and leaving again, but he nodded as well, one hand drifting to the leash attached to the dogs. "Should we gather our stuff now?" "Yes," DeWitt replied. "Pack only essentials, clothes, personal items. We're traveling light. We'll have a convoy ready by midnight." He sighed. "I'm sorry it's come to this, but we can't risk an attack here. Our intelligence sources are generally reliable. And if they say the criminals are sniffing around, we have to respond." Deputy Marshal Tyler led them back to their rooms, where father and son loaded their modest belongings into the same duffel bags they had arrived with. The dogs grew restless at the sight of suitcases, sensing another upheaval. Mark murmured gentle reassurances to calm them, though a knot twisted in his gut, telling him the next few hours might be tense. He couldn't help recalling the last convoy ride, a nighttime departure from the farm he loved. Now, once again, darkness would cloak their flight. Around 10 at night, the marshals and FBI agents ramped up security protocols, scanning the hallways, double-checking cameras, and gathering their vehicles in a secured garage. Tyler gave Mark and Ryan a final briefing, explaining they would transfer to an unmarked van that would drive a carefully mapped route. They'd switch vehicles midway, ensuring no tail could follow them. Mark listened intently, each detail reinforcing how precarious their situation still was. At exactly midnight, the group moved. Mark, Ryan, and the dogs were ushered into a plain gray van with tinted windows. DeWitt slid in beside them, a sidearm holstered at his waist. Tyler entered last, shutting the door and tapping the roof to signal the driver. The engine rumbled to life, and they pulled out of the facility's gated lot, merging onto a quiet highway under the cover of darkness. Another government sedan followed close behind, headlights off, relying on night vision gear. For the first hour, the drive was eerily uneventful. Mark stared through the tinted window at stretches of moonlit fields and the occasional cluster of houses. He wondered if somewhere out there, Cyans or his people were circling with malicious intent. He tried to steady his breathing, reminding himself that these trained agents wouldn't let anything happen without a fight. Across from him, Ryan leaned his head back against the seat, eyes half closed in fatigue. The dogs rested at Ryan's feet, twitching with each bump in the road. DeWitt, seated by Mark, spoke softly. "We arranged a new location deeper inland, an old training compound, refurbished to handle protective operations. It's off the grid, not listed on any official documents. You'll be safer there." "Thank you," Mark whispered, trying not to wake Ryan. "I hope this is the last move." DeWitt's eyes flicked toward the front of the van. "That makes two of us." After another half hour, the driver announced they would switch vehicles. Mark felt a jolt of anxiety as the van exited onto a narrow lane, leading to a deserted rest area. Two more unmarked SUVs waited with lights off. DeWitt quickly shuffled Mark and Ryan out of the van, the dogs trotting alongside. Tyler guided them to the rearmost SUV, where they climbed inside on the passenger side, leaving behind the original van. The entire maneuver took only minutes, executed with silent precision. Then the SUV rolled back onto a secondary road. They'd barely gone 10 miles when the first sign of trouble appeared. DeWitt, in the front passenger seat, stiffened as his phone buzzed. He answered, speaking in terse phrases. "Copy that. Yes. Understood." He turned to Tyler, who was driving, and muttered, "We may have a tail. Our advance team thinks they spotted a suspicious vehicle near the rest area as we left." Tyler glanced at the rearview mirror. "You see anything?" DeWitt leaned toward the side window. "No direct sign, but we'll adjust. Take the next bypass route." Mark's pulse hammered. He peered out the back window, but darkness made it impossible to discern if anyone followed. The tension in the SUV grew thick. Tyler turned at the next intersection, forging along a winding road lined by tall pine trees. The second SUV that had joined them earlier followed at a short distance, its headlights angled to keep them in view without drawing too much attention. They pressed on for another 15 minutes. Just when Mark started to hope it was a false alarm, bright headlights burst onto the road behind them, a lone pickup roaring closer. Tyler cursed under her breath, accelerating. DeWitt keyed his radio. Contact, contact. We have an unknown tail. Black pickup truck, attempting evasive maneuvers." Ryan gripped the seat, eyes wide as the SUV jerked forward. The dogs whined. Mark felt the adrenaline spike through him. He'd never been in a high-speed chase, let alone one involving armed criminals. All he could do was hold on and pray the FBI had the upper hand. Tyler took a hard turn onto a gravel side lane, and the second SUV tried to block the pickup, weaving behind them. Mark caught glimpses of dust clouds illuminated by the chase vehicle's beams. The next moments blurred together, the squeal of tires, the crunch of gravel, and the barking of commands over the radio. The second SUV dropped back, presumably to intercept the truck, but the truck dodged around, inching closer to Tyler's fleeing vehicle. A muzzle flash broke through the darkness. Somebody was shooting. Mark's breath seized. At the same time, Tyler braked sharply, yanking the wheel to swerve around a fallen branch in the middle of the lane. The abrupt maneuver sent Mark lurching sideways, nearly colliding with Ryan's shoulder. The dogs barked, scrambling for footing. DeWitt spun around in his seat, brandishing his pistol. "Ryan, get down!" he shouted. Ryan hunched over the dogs as the SUV skidded, fishtailing along the lane. Outside, the pursuing truck roared even closer. Yet the second government SUV accelerated behind that truck, lights flashing. Mark heard more shots ring out. Tyler floored it, gaining distance. The radio crackled with shouts, someone yelling about the truck's tires being hit. Another agent roared for backup. Mark's mind spun. This was no idle threat. They were caught in real danger, bullets flying on a rural byway. He clenched the seatbelt strap, heart slamming like a drum. Ahead, the road twisted around a bend. Tyler navigated skillfully, taking advantage of the pickup's compromised tires. The second SUV loomed behind the attackers, forcing them to choose whether to keep chasing or break off. More muzzle flashes erupted, and then a sudden explosion of sparks signaled that the pickup's front tire must have blown. The truck lurched, slewing sideways. Tyler didn't slow, forging ahead, but Mark glanced back in time to see the truck slam to a stop against a roadside ditch. The second SUV, lights blazing, skidded to a halt, armed agents piling out to secure the scene. Within minutes, their radio crackled confirmation. "Suspects detained. We have one down, one in custody. No sign of additional vehicles." DeWitt exhaled loudly. Tyler eased her foot off the gas, shoulders trembling from pent-up adrenaline. Mark felt Ryan's hand clamp onto his wrist, as if seeking proof they were all still alive. DeWitt turned in his seat. "You all right back there?" Mark swallowed. "We're fine." He glanced at Ryan, who was pale but unhurt. The dogs were panting in terror, though physically unharmed. God, that was close. Tyler kept driving, taking back roads for another half hour until they reached an abandoned warehouse lot, where another set of agents stood ready to escort them to the final safe site. Mark and Ryan stumbled out of the SUV, limbs shaky, hearts pounding. The sense of relief was immediate, but incomplete. They had escaped one ambush. Yet the knowledge that criminals were willing to shoot at them on a dark road left Mark reeling. Before Mark could form any questions, DeWitt spoke quietly. "We need to keep moving. We'll arrange for medical checks and statements later. For now, we stay mobile until we're certain no other threats are trailing us." Mark nodded, speechless. Ryan stood by his side, arms wrapped around the trembling dogs. No words could capture the swirl of fear, anger, and gratitude they felt at that moment. They were alive, but the nightmare was still unfolding, each escape from danger reinforcing how high the stakes truly were. Mark stood in the musty warehouse lot, trying to steady his trembling hands, as the new group of agents guided him and Ryan toward another unmarked vehicle. The adrenaline from the chase still throbbed in his veins, leaving his heart pounding and his thoughts tangled. Ryan clung to the two dogs, who whined and paced, their nails clicking on the cracked pavement. Despite the swirl of tension, Mark felt an overwhelming wave of relief that they had survived the attempted ambush. When he glanced at Ryan, his son's pale face and wide eyes conveyed both lingering terror and unspoken resolve. DeWitt spoke quietly to a nearby marshal, confirming that the assailants had been subdued. One suspect was wounded and in custody, the other reportedly unconscious. Mark couldn't muster sympathy for them. They'd tried to gun down his family and the agents protecting them. Now, the father and son were uprooted yet again, forced to move to a second location in the same night. Mark struggled to process the reality that men like Science would go to such lengths to silence a pair of witnesses. If anything, it only deepened his resolve to testify and see those criminals locked away. A stiff breeze carried the faint scent of dust and gasoline across the deserted lot. Dim moonlight revealed sagging walls and broken windows in the old warehouse, further lending the scene an unsettling air. Tyler approached, her face drawn with tension. "We'll need to hurry," she said, glancing at Ryan with a flicker of concern. "Another team is securing the roads behind us, but we can't stay here. A chopper should arrive soon to transport you to a safer location. We're shifting tactics. Ground travel isn't reliable when they can track or intercept us." Ryan's grip on the leashes tightened. "A helicopter?" he asked, voice faint. "At night?" DeWitt caught the question. "We'll use night vision equipment. The pilot's experienced with covert insertions. It's safer than risking more ambushes along rural back roads." Seeing Ryan's unease, he added, "We won't push you into danger. The flight is short, just enough to get you out of reach." Mark felt an odd mixture of relief and apprehension. Flying might evade further pursuit, but the idea of climbing into a chopper in the dead of night, with criminals possibly roaming the county, made him uneasy. Still, he would do whatever it took to protect Ryan. "All right," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "Just tell us where to go." The plan, as quickly outlined, involved waiting at the warehouse until the helicopter arrived, then flying to a small airstrip where yet another secure transport would meet them. From there, they would continue to a new safe site far from their home county. The entire operation was coordinated across multiple agencies, every step timed to minimize risk. Mark looked at Ryan, sensing how exhausted his son was. The events of the night weighed on them both, but there was no alternative. While they waited, a paramedic from one of the marshal units quickly examined everyone for injuries. Mark's shoulder throbbed from being flung around in the SUV, and Ryan's left arm sported bruises from bracing himself against the seat. The dogs were shaken, but unhurt, aside from scrapes on their paws. The paramedic patched them up with a few bandages and declared them fit to continue traveling. A fresh wave of gratitude washed over Mark, knowing the danger could have ended so much worse. Tyler offered them bottled water and granola bars, while DeWitt paced, phone pressed to his ear. Mark overheard fragments of conversation, references to the downed pickup, talk of ballistic evidence, a mention of a hospital for the injured suspect. The corner of DeWitt's mouth tightened as he hung up, crossing back to address father and son. "We've confirmed at least one of the attackers was connected to Science," he said quietly. "He isn't talking yet, but we'll see if interrogation yields anything about the rest of the network." Ryan's knuckles whitened around the leash. "Why do they care so much about us specifically?" he asked, voice trembling. "They've got a big operation, right?" Why risk everything just to take out a farmer and his kid? DeWitt's eyes flickered with sympathy. Sometimes organizations like this see witnesses as serious threats. You've identified the bunker on your land. You've spoken to federal agents. Science might fear what else you know. Fear drives them to extreme measures. We can't underestimate their desperation. Mark drew in a shaky breath. Whatever it takes, we'll follow your lead, he said. But I hope you catch Sayan soon. I don't want Ryan living with this fear forever. A short while later, the rumble of rotor blades broke the stillness. A helicopter approached from the west, barely visible until it swooped low, wind whipping loose debris across the lot. Agents scrambled into position, shining beams to guide the pilot. The craft hovered overhead, then set down with practiced precision. Ryan pressed a hand to his cap, shielding his eyes from the kicked-up dust, and the dogs cowered against his legs. Mark stepped forward, squinting in the swirling grit. Tyler hustled them toward the chopper, shouting instructions over the din. Keep your heads low. Take the rear seats. The dogs will go in the front if needed. They've done cargo flights with canines before. Mark urged the dogs forward, noticing how uneasy they were with the deafening noise. A canine handler from the Marshal team helped secure them in the small forward area, and Mark had just enough time to reassure Ryan with a nod before they climbed into the passenger compartment. Inside, the helicopter was cramped and smelled of fuel. They strapped themselves in as DeWitt followed. Another agent slid the door shut with a metallic thump, and the pilot's voice crackled over the headset. Strap in tight. Taking off in 30 seconds. Mark gave Ryan's hand a quick squeeze, feeling his son's fingers tremble slightly. Then the engine whine intensified, and they lifted off, pressed gently into their seats. Below, the warehouse lights and silhouettes of agents shrank rapidly. Mark glimpsed the second SUV that had driven them here, parked with lights off near the battered lot entrance. Then the helicopter gained altitude, the landscape fading into a patchwork of night. Ryan stared out the window, wide-eyed, scanning the dark horizon. All Mark could think about was how quickly life had changed from the daily rhythms of farmland to covert nighttime helicopter flights. He steadied himself, forcing slow breaths, hoping the journey would be short. The pilot navigated with minimal lighting, relying on instruments. DeWitt tapped Mark's shoulder, pointing to the headset so they could speak. Mark slipped it on, hearing the hiss of static. DeWitt's voice came through. We'll be in the air about 15 minutes, then land at a private strip. Another set of agents will drive us from there. Ryan, also wearing a headset, leaned forward. And then, where do we go? The new site is about an hour's drive from the airstrip, DeWitt answered. A repurposed facility with multiple layers of security. We've never had a breach there. You'll be safe. Mark nodded, though the doubt still gnawed at him. He didn't question the agent further. Fatigue pressed in, and he felt grateful the flight was so short. The dogs were probably terrified in the cargo area, but Tyler had assured them the animals would be fine once they were on the ground again. A flicker of guilt pricked Mark. He prayed that soon they could all have a normal routine again, or at least something resembling it. Sure enough, after 15 tense minutes of flight, the helicopter began its descent. The pilot guided them to a narrow strip of tarmac illuminated by two vehicles at opposite ends. Mark glimpsed silhouettes, armed marshals or FBI agents standing guard. The landing was smooth, though the rotor wash sent dust swirling again. As soon as they touched down, the pilot powered down slightly, allowing an agent to open the door and signal for them to exit. Mark and Ryan climbed out, the dogs whimpering with relief as a handler helped them disembark. The air here was slightly warmer, and Mark spotted farmland in the distance, grain silos maybe. He felt a pang of longing for home, quickly buried by the swirl of armed men ushering them along. Another SUV idled nearby, engine running, ready for immediate departure. DeWitt guided them in, calling over his shoulder for the pilot to wait until they were clear. Within minutes, they were driving away from the airstrip, weaving along back roads marked by dim reflectors. Ryan slumped against the seat, hugging one dog while the other nosed at Mark's shoulder. The teen's exhaustion and fear were palpable. Mark reached over, giving Ryan's arm a gentle squeeze. "Almost there," he murmured, though he had no real sense of how long there might last. DeWitt up front stayed on his phone, relaying coordinates to someone Mark couldn't see. After an hour's drive, they arrived at a secluded compound, surrounded by high fencing. Beyond the fence stood a cluster of low buildings. Floodlights dotted the perimeter, while uniformed marshals stood at intervals. A tall gate slid open upon their approach. The SUV rumbled through, followed by another vehicle. Agents with rifles scanned the area, confirming no unauthorized presence. Once inside, the gate sealed behind them. The dogs let out soft whines, picking up on the tension saturating the place. DeWitt exited first, opening the door for Mark and Ryan. "Welcome to your new safe site," he said, though his voice held no trace of cheer. "Let's get you settled. We have rooms in a central barracks building. Basic, but secure. Tomorrow we'll run a full briefing." Night had long since deepened. Mark could see a pale glow over the eastern sky that hinted dawn might not be far off. Weariness dragged at his limbs, a bone-deep tiredness from days of displacement and hours of crisis. Ryan's shoulders sagged as he followed his father through a side entrance, the dogs padding close. Inside, the building was indeed sparse. Cinder block walls, concrete floors, bright overhead lighting. Yet it felt sturdy, reassuring in its utilitarian simplicity. A young marshal led them down a corridor to twin rooms with steel doors and small windows looking onto a hallway. Each room had 2 single beds, a small bathroom, and a table. Better than the last safe site, Mark thought with a grim smile, but still far from home. DeWitt gave them a quick rundown of meal schedules, security rules, and phone restrictions. They'd receive official IDs to move around certain parts of the compound. Mark nodded through the explanation, numb from exhaustion. He set down his bag, noticing Ryan practically swaying on his feet. DeWitt ended with a subdued, "I'll check on you later. For now, get some sleep." Then the agent left, closing the door behind him. Mark turned to find Ryan collapsing onto one of the beds, the dogs curling protectively at his feet. Mark peeled off his dusty jacket, letting it drop onto a chair, and sank onto the second bed with a groan. The mattress was stiff, but at least it was a place to lie down. They were safe for now, safe in a labyrinth of tall fences and watchtowers, guarded by men with guns. Safe in the sense that nobody could easily approach them. But the knowledge that criminals had already tried to intercept them once made it hard to fully trust any walls. Mark let his eyes drift shut, determined not to fret for a moment. He was exhausted beyond words, and the day's chaos weighed on him like a 1,000-pound anchor. Listening to Ryan's breathing slow, Mark prayed for a few hours of peace, some pocket of rest before the next wave of anxiety inevitably arrived. He told himself it couldn't get worse, that soon the FBI's net would tighten and Sayans would be taken down. The farm, with all its routines and honest work, waited for them, a beacon of normalcy on the far side of this nightmare. Mark clung to that thought as exhaustion overtook him. If he and Ryan could endure just a little longer, they might yet reclaim the life that had been stolen in a storm of secrets, threats, and midnight getaways. For the next 2 days, Mark and Ryan found themselves in an uneasy routine within the fortified walls of the new safe site. Tall fences gleamed under floodlights each night, patrolled by armed marshals who barely spoke as they made their rounds. Mark had never been one for feeling trapped, yet here he was, stuck inside another compound, where every corridor led to a locked door. At least this facility felt sturdier and more secure than the last, and the daily guard rotation seemed more numerous, suggesting the authorities took the latest threat seriously. Despite the fear gnawing at them both, Mark could see that Ryan's color had improved. No more frantic midnight chases, at least for now. Their new quarters, a pair of adjoining rooms, were marginally larger, with thicker mattresses and a small table by the window. A locked metal shutter kept the view obscured, so they had no sense of the outside landscape beyond a sliver of sky. The dogs had a designated corner for sleeping, with fresh bedding provided by the staff. Whenever Ryan fretted, Mark would try to reassure him that the heightened security was proof the FBI was closing in on Syans. That hope carried them through the long hours. On the third morning there, DeWitt showed up unannounced, his face haggard, but his expression purposeful. He led father and son to a briefing room, a clean, windowless space with rows of plastic chairs facing a projection screen. Tyler was there, along with two other marshals Mark hadn't met before. DeWitt wasted little time on pleasantries. "Good news," he began, clicking on the projector to display a map of the region. Red circles and lines crisscrossed the counties around Mark's home, each marker representing a known or suspected safe house for Syans' operation. "We've had multiple breakthroughs in the last 48 hours. One of the men who attacked you on the road, after receiving medical treatment, started cooperating. He's confirmed that Syans is still local, likely trying to regroup. Turns out the sheriff was deeper in their pocket than we thought, so some of the smugglers are scrambling without his protection." Mark and Ryan exchanged glances. Ryan's face showed a flicker of relief. "So the operation is falling apart?" "Potentially," DeWitt replied, tapping a laser pointer on the biggest red circle. "We've pinpointed a compound in the next county, a rundown ranch that used to be a horse training center. Based on intelligence, Syans and his people are using it as a temporary headquarters. We're mobilizing a large task force to raid it soon. If we succeed, we'll cut off the head of the snake." Tyler stepped forward. "If Syans is captured, you may no longer need constant relocation. We could still keep you under guard while evidence is processed, but it would be a step closer to letting you go home." Mark felt his heart leap. "How soon is this raid?" he asked, fighting the urge to show too much excitement. "By the end of the week," DeWitt answered. "We want enough surveillance to ensure minimal danger to our team. They're heavily armed, and we can't risk a standoff if we can avoid it. Once it's done, we'll see how quickly the threat level drops." Ryan gripped the edges of his chair. "Do you think they've messed with our farm while we've been here? I keep picturing them burning it down or stealing everything." A muscle in DeWitt's jaw tightened. "We've maintained a presence there. Agents rotate in and out, plus we have surveillance cameras set up. So far, your property remains intact. We've also expanded patrols in the region, I won't lie. There's always a possibility they'll lash out in desperation, but we haven't seen that yet." Mark let out a long breath, shoulders sagging with relief. "All right. Thank you." After the briefing, father and son returned to their rooms, each wrestling with a mix of hope and dread. Capturing Syans might indeed end their nightmare, but the memory of those nighttime gunshots on the back road remained fresh in their minds. Having just barely escaped, they knew how ruthless these criminals could be. Mark resolved not to let optimism cloud his caution. He told Ryan that, for now, they had to keep following instructions no matter how long it took. Later that day, a new face appeared. Special Agent Bardwell, a quiet man with silvering hair who introduced himself as part of Riley's extended team. Bardwell asked them a series of detailed questions about the farmland's layout, wanting to understand every possible approach route the smugglers might have used. Mark produced a sketched map labeling the barns, fences, and gates. It felt surreal, discussing the intimate details of his property with strangers, but Bardwell's calm, methodical demeanor put Mark somewhat at ease. At least someone was paying attention to the farmland's vulnerabilities now. Another evening settled over the facility, the overhead lights flickering on as dusk sank outside. Mark and Ryan ate dinner in a utilitarian mess hall with a few marshals. The dogs received a ration of kibble, which they seemed to accept without complaint. Mark noticed a subdued hush had fallen over the staff, a sense of tension that suggested a major operation was indeed underway. Whenever he asked for updates, the standard reply was that everything was on track. He tried not to dwell on that phrase, hoping it meant a swift conclusion. That night, Mark dozed fitfully, dreaming of his father's face. He pictured the older man guiding a plow behind a team of horses decades earlier, reminding young Mark that the land was a gift, something to be cherished and protected. In the dream, the horses spooked, and the farmland blurred into shadows. He woke with a pounding heart, recalling how many years he'd poured into those fields, only to find them turned into a criminal's hideout. Guilt and anger still gnawed at him, though logically he knew it wasn't his fault. Around dawn, Mark rose from the stiff mattress, expecting another day of monotony. But as soon as he stepped into the corridor, Tyler was there, expression grave. "There's been a development," she said. "Agents are deploying right now to hit that ranch where Saenz is holed up." Mark's pulse hammered with sudden urgency. "Is it happening now? You said they needed more surveillance." Tyler nodded. Something changed. "Intel suggests Saenz is planning to flee the area within hours, so we're moving early." She hesitated. "We're locking down the facility. No one in or out until we confirm the outcome. Please stay in your quarters or the common room. We'll update you as soon as we can." Ryan joined them moments later, anxiety flashing in his eyes when he caught wind of the news. Mark placed an arm around his son's shoulders. "It sounds like they're finally closing in. We just have to wait." For the next several hours, father and son hovered in the common area, where a large television displayed a national news channel. The volume was low, but every so often Mark's eyes flicked to the scrolling headlines, wondering if their local drama would break into mainstream coverage. It never did. The marshals who passed through offered no new information, their faces set in professional neutrality. Afternoon crept by. Ryan paced near the window, while Mark busied himself with a puzzle left on a table, the kind meant for a child, but at least giving his hands something to do. Even the dogs sensed the tension. They lay beside Ryan, occasionally raising their heads in concern whenever footsteps echoed in the hall. Finally, well after nightfall, DeWitt entered with a weary smile. "It's done," he announced, voice subdued. "The task force stormed the ranch. Saenz and several of his key associates are in custody. 2 suspects were killed in the crossfire, but no law enforcement casualties beyond minor injuries. It went as smoothly as we could have hoped." Ryan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Mark's shoulders sagged with relief. "So it's over?" he asked, struggling to grasp that reality. DeWitt's eyes narrowed slightly. "There's still cleanup. Some of Saenz's men might be at large, but we've taken down the core. The local sheriff was found too. He was hiding on that ranch, apparently trying to protect Saenz in exchange for hush money. He surrendered when confronted. He's already talking to reduce charges." Ryan looked stunned. "Sheriff Whitaker was there the whole time?" "Part of the ring from the beginning, it seems," DeWitt confirmed. "He might have been threatened initially, but he ended up complicit. We'll sort it out in court." Mark sank into a chair, heart racing. Relief warred with rage at the betrayal of someone he'd once called a friend. "What does that mean for us?" DeWitt clasped his hands. "We'll maintain protective detail until we confirm none of Saenz's foot soldiers plan revenge. But this definitely changes the game. With their leader gone, the operation is effectively dismantled." Ryan exhaled shakily, tears gathering in his eyes. "So we might be able to go home soon?" DeWitt nodded with cautious optimism. "That's the plan. We'll spend a few days verifying the situation, ensuring no pockets of resistance remain. We'll also need your testimony once prosecutors get rolling, but we can handle that with secure escorts. If all goes well, you could be back on your farm within a week or 2. Mark's throat felt tight with emotion. He reached out and squeezed Ryan's shoulder. "Thank you," he managed, voice thick. "I can't believe it's almost over." Tyler joined them, offering father and son a comforting smile. "We'll keep you updated on the next steps. In the meantime, rest. Tonight at least, you can relax knowing the main threat is off the streets." Ryan wiped at his eyes, burying his face in one dog's fur. The other dog wagged its tail, oblivious to the significance of the moment. Mark closed his eyes, letting exhaustion and gratitude wash over him. It wasn't quite the same as stepping onto his front porch back home, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the end of their nightmare was in sight. Mark woke before dawn, his body still wired to the old farm routine, despite weeks spent behind fences and locked doors. The past few days had been a dizzying mixture of relief and impatience. Ever since the raid that brought down Sayans, the FBI had promised that father and son could soon go home. Each morning, Mark rose hoping this would be the day they gave the green light. But the marshals always insisted on more time. Time to verify leads. Time to ensure no remaining conspirators were lurking in the shadows. Each fresh day bled into the next, and though Mark was grateful for his and Ryan's safety, the hunger to see their own fields again gnawed at him. Ryan seemed more restless than ever, pacing the corridors with the dogs in tow, flipping through textbooks some staffers had procured so he wouldn't fall behind in his studies. Mark tried to keep him focused on the future, reminding him that they would be home in time to prepare for senior year. But occasionally, a flash of doubt filled Ryan's eyes, as though he feared this protective limbo might stretch on for months. Mark could only reassure him with what the marshals said. A little more patience, a bit more caution, and everything would resolve. Finally, one cool morning, Deputy Marshal Tyler stepped into the common room with a broad smile. "We have official clearance," she announced. "You're free to go home. Marshals will escort you for the first few days to ensure no lingering threats remain, but you can sleep in your own beds tonight." Ryan froze for a moment, not quite believing he'd heard correctly. One of the dogs let out a happy bark, sensing the sudden shift in mood. Mark stood from his seat slowly, a wave of gratitude and excitement pulsing through him. "This is real?" he asked, voice a bit rough. Tyler confirmed with a nod, and Ryan flung his arms around his dad, eyes bright with tears. Mark felt that familiar tightness in his throat, the final piece of hope that maybe they had weathered the storm. There was paperwork to finalize, of course. Forms from the FBI, disclaimers from the marshals, even an acknowledgement that father and son might be called as key witnesses in upcoming trials. It was late afternoon by the time they loaded their meager bags, and their dogs, into a government SUV. DeWitt walked them out, shaking Mark's hand firmly. "You've done a huge service by stepping forward and cooperating," he said. "Between your statements and the evidence we gathered, we have a solid case against Sayans and his men. I know it's been a nightmare, but your courage made a difference." Mark thanked him, overwhelmed by the swirl of emotions. He climbed into the back seat with Ryan, letting Tyler and a second marshal settle in front. The dogs nestled on the floor, tails wagging nervously as the engine turned over. Then, with the facility gates sliding open, they pulled onto a winding road. This time, though, Mark's chest felt lighter. They weren't fleeing or hiding. They were returning. The drive took over an hour. Tyler explained that additional units had been monitoring the farm, ensuring it was safe to occupy. According to brief updates, nobody had set foot there except for authorized agents, and no sign of sabotage or break-ins had surfaced. Mark's grip on the armrest tightened each time the SUV rounded a bend and farm-like scenery came into view. Rusted silos, grazing cattle on distant hillsides, each site reminded him of home. The tension in Ryan's posture mirrored Mark's own. They both stared out the window, searching for a glimpse of their property. At last, they turned onto the familiar gravel driveway that wound through the Prescott's outer fields. Weeds had sprouted along the edges, the track less maintained than Mark preferred, but it was definitely theirs. The house appeared in the distance, a two-story structure with chipped white paint, the porch they'd built so long ago standing firm. Mark's heart clenched at the sight. The barn roof, the windmill, the old tractor parked near the fence. It was all there. The evening sun lit the fields in a golden haze, and for a fleeting moment, everything looked perfectly normal. Tyler parked near the house, stepping out first to scan the yard. The second marshal hopped from the front seat, weapon at the ready, checking corners. Ryan drummed his fingers on the seat, impatient to exit. Mark ruffled his son's hair. "Wait for their signal, okay? Just to be sure." Ryan nodded, lips pressed tight. But after only a minute or two, Tyler waved them forward, nodding that everything was clear. They spilled out of the SUV. The dogs bounded onto the grass, sniffing ecstatically. Mark and Ryan followed, letting the late sunlight warm their faces. It felt surreal to stand in their own yard without fear of an ambush. Mark's eyes roamed over every detail: the battered mailbox, the old swing bench, the dandelions sprouting by the fence. A wave of relief almost sent him to his knees. "Home," he murmured under his breath. Ryan inhaled deeply, letting out a shaky laugh. "It's like we never left, but also like we've been gone forever." He turned to Mark. "Let's go inside," Mark agreed. The front porch steps creaked in that familiar way as they climbed. The key turned in the lock and the door swung open. Dust motes danced in the light, the interior quiet and still. No sign of damage. The living room looked the same as the day they'd rushed out with the FBI. Magazines on the coffee table, a framed photo of Mark's father on the mantel. A wave of gratitude again welled in Mark's chest. He gently placed a palm on the doorframe, as if confirming it was real. The marshals followed them inside, giving a cursory sweep for safety. When they confirmed no intruders were hiding, they retreated to the porch. Tyler explained that at least 2 officers would remain on site around the clock for the next several days, just as a precaution. Mark had no intention of complaining. If that security guaranteed Ryan's peace of mind, it was worth it. Father and son wandered from room to room, reacquainting themselves with ordinary life. The electricity was still on, thanks to the FBI's arrangement, and so was the water. The fridge, of course, was nearly empty, but that was a small matter. The dogs nosed around, sniffing each corner, tails wagging as though checking every inch to confirm it was theirs. Mark found the old tractor key on its hook by the back door, feeling a stab of nostalgia at how many times he'd grabbed it at sunrise to till the fields. Later, they regrouped with the marshals on the porch to watch the sun sink behind the western tree line. The sky glowed orange and pink, a gentle breeze stirring the farm's grass. Ryan sat on the steps, leaning against one dog while he gazed at the horizon. Mark joined him, slipping an arm around his son's shoulders. For a while, neither spoke, content to savor the quiet that had once been so ordinary and now felt precious. "I'm going to talk to the animals tomorrow," Ryan said softly, a ghost of a grin tugging at his lips. "Check on everything. Fences, water troughs, all of it. Guess we have a lot of catching up to do." Mark chuckled, tears prickling at his eyes. "We sure do. The cows and horses must have been mighty confused with all the strangers around, but we'll get them settled, fix whatever's been neglected." Tyler gave them a respectful distance, only stepping closer to report that another marshal patrol had arrived. Mark nodded in acknowledgement. Eventually, the quiet deepened into night. The marshals retreated to a small trailer they had parked near the barn, maintaining watch from that vantage point. Mark and Ryan slipped indoors to rummage for something edible. They found a few cans of soup and a box of cereal in the pantry. It wasn't gourmet, but it was their own food in their own kitchen. Dinner was a subdued but comforting affair. They heated the soup on the ancient stove, each bite reminding them of a routine unbroken by fear. The dogs ate kibble from bowls on the floor, looking more relaxed than they had in weeks. Later, father and son parted for bed, each heading to their own room. Mark switched on a bedside lamp. one he'd used for years to read before dozing off. For a long time, he simply lay there, listening to the crickets outside and the occasional whinny of a horse in the pasture. Eventually, the tension that had kept him awake in the safe sites drained away, replaced by a bone-deep contentment. Sleep overtook him with surprising ease. He woke at dawn to a familiar sight, the sun cresting over the eastern pasture, streaking the sky in soft gold. He dressed quickly, stepping onto the porch with a cup of coffee made from his own kitchen. That first sip tasted better than any brew he'd had in protective custody. The yard was dew-soaked and glistening. Mark spotted a pair of marshals 100 yards away, patrolling near the barn. He nodded to them, raising his mug in gratitude. They nodded back. Ryan emerged not long after, the dogs bounding around him. "Dad, can we check the barn?" he asked. "I want to see if everything's still in its place." Mark agreed. They ambled over, the dogs scampering ahead. The doors creaked as they swung open, releasing the smell of hay and dust. The tractor stood where it always had, dusty from disuse but intact. A few boards needed replacing and some tools had been moved, likely by FBI evidence teams, but it still felt like home. Ryan ran a hand over the metal fender of the old tractor, a grin tugging at his lips. "Feels like we never left," he whispered again. Mark patted the machine. "We'll give her a tune-up soon, and we can start tidying the fields for the new season." He glanced at Ryan. "You up for some real chores again?" Ryan's eyes shone. "I am." By mid-morning, they'd finished quick repairs to the barn's interior, rechecked the fences on foot, and confirmed that no new damage had surfaced. The FBI had apparently done a decent job of maintaining the property. Livestock that had remained behind under caretaker watch looked well-fed, if a bit spooked by all the strangers over the weeks. Mark felt an indescribable lightness as he reconnected with the routines that had shaped his life for decades. Even so, the presence of armed marshals at the perimeter reminded him that the threat, while diminished, wasn't fully gone. Over the following days, a steady stream of calls and visits from investigators occurred. They brought more forms, scheduled Mark and Ryan for depositions, and set times for future court appearances. Mark handled it with calm determination, refusing to let bureaucratic details darken the joy of being back. Ryan spent any free time acquainting himself with the farmland's changes, small overgrowth in places, new buds sprouting where the season had advanced. Though the memory of being chased by gunfire still lurked at the edges of their minds, the daily rhythms of plowing, feeding, and repairing soothed them both. One evening, Tyler informed them that the final handful of Sands' associates had been apprehended. No credible threats remained. The marshals would soon reduce their presence, leaving a single deputy in the area for periodic checks. Mark smiled at the news. He and Ryan were truly free to reclaim their lives. They still had to testify at upcoming trials, an ordeal that loomed, but at least they could face that from the safety and comfort of home. Days slid by, turning into a couple of weeks. With each sunrise, the farm regained its familiar pulse. Horses galloped across the pasture, the cows gathered by the fence for their morning feed, and father and son navigated daily tasks side by side. On Sundays, they sat on the porch, sipping iced tea in the late afternoon, letting the dogs snooze under their chairs. The marshals had all but vanished, checking in only by phone or short visits. On a crisp morning, Mark found Ryan leaning against the porch rail, eyes drifting across the fields. The teen's shoulders were relaxed, a fresh sense of ease in his posture. "Dad," he said softly, catching Mark's eye, "I was thinking, when I fill out my college applications, I'm going to write about what happened here, about how we stood up for what was right. That might sound weird, but I feel like this changed us. Maybe others need to know." Mark stepped up beside him, laying a hand on his son's shoulder. "You do what feels right. If telling the story helps you make sense of it, then you should share it. I'm proud of you, Ryan." He stared into the distance. Not everyone would have had your courage, chasing down trespassers, speaking up even when it was terrifying. Ryan's lips quirked into a smile. I guess we both had to be brave. He paused, gaze flicking to the nearest fence line. I used to think nothing big ever happened on farmland, just quiet days, local gossip. But it turns out anywhere can become a battleground. Mark exhaled. True, but it's our land. We protect it, and I think we did our part. They stayed on the porch a while longer, letting the morning sun warm them. A faint breeze carried the sweet scent of grass and distant honeysuckle. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves, the dogs padding around, the hum of insects. No black SUVs or helicopters, no watchtowers or bulletproof vests, just home. In the end, that was all they'd ever wanted. That afternoon, they both got back to work on the land, as if their time away had been a mere interruption. The normal chores felt almost sacred now, tightening bolts on the tractor's axle, repairing a broken fence, ensuring the cattle's water trough was filled. Ryan even teased Mark that they should name one of the newborn calves FBI. Mark laughed, the sound echoing across the pasture in a way that felt joyous, cleansing. Then they continued the day's tasks, father and son together, each step reaffirming that this land was theirs to shape and defend. Sometimes Mark still woke from nightmares recalling the forced relocations and the violent chase under moonlight. There would be depositions and possibly court appearances ahead, but the criminals who had threatened them were behind bars. The sheriff who'd betrayed them was no longer in office. And with each passing sunrise, the weight of those memories grew less oppressive. The farmland didn't judge or dwell on the past. It simply continued, renewing each season, ready to provide for those willing to care for it. In the end, that was the greatest relief. To return to a place where honest work and everyday routines could heal wounds that had been inflicted by greed and corruption. Mark knew they'd never forget the fear and chaos, nor would they ignore how easily criminals had infiltrated their rural haven. But they also learned that steadfast integrity, family bonds, and a community's vigilance could overpower even the darkest schemes. Together, father and son walked the fields, reacquainting themselves with every furrow of soil, determined never again to let outsiders exploit what they held dear. They had come home, and no one would ever drive them away again.